Have you ever tried to just sit still? Like maybe meditate or just watch a sunset without immediately reaching for your phone. If you have, you definitely know the struggle. Your brain just constantly wants to latch on to things, right? It wants to categorize, measure, and then immediately move on to the next thing. Well, let's jump right into this explainer, because today we're looking at Dan Weber's incredibly fascinating cognitive model. It's called Surfism, and we're going to explore exactly why our built-in spatial bias actually corrodes our ability to just exist in the present moment.
So we usually blame our phones for this, right? Or our crazy busy schedules, or just modern society in general for all this restless energy. But what if the root cause is actually buried deep within the grammar we use literally every single day? It turns out the answer isn't about modern distractions at all. It's actually about a fundamental divide in how our brains process reality, specifically through spatial and non-spatial attention. See, we usually think of attention as this one single spotlight we just point at different things. But actually, scratch that. Our cognition is split into two totally different modes. On one hand, we've got a way of looking at the world that is just completely obsessed with boundaries, shapes, and physical space. But on the other hand, we have this entirely different mode, one that's capable of experiencing continuous, unbroken states of presence. The real reason it is so incredibly hard to just sit and breathe, our brains massively play favorites between these two modes.
To really wrap our heads around this, Weber uses this brilliant metaphor called surfism, where human awareness is represented by a continuous, flowing wave. I want you to literally picture the ocean right now. Awareness itself isn't some solid object you can pick up and put in your pocket, right? It's fluid, it's dynamic, it's ever-present. It is basically the medium through which all of our experiences happen. But here's the catch. We don't just passively watch this wave. How we interact with it changes entirely depending on the cognitive tools we bring to the beach. Our mental structures dictate whether we're aggressively skimming over the top of the water or, grounding ourselves in those deep, quiet currents beneath it. Think about a surfboard for a second. It has a nose, a tail, very distinct edges. When you're on a surfboard, your entire reality is defined by navigating physical space and managing those boundaries. You're constantly, frantically calculating edges just to stay upright. But what creates the shape of the wave itself? The reef. And the reef is vast. It's submerged, continuous, and it completely lacks those immediate sharp edges that demand our frantic attention. The reef is just always there. It's quietly shaping the experience from a state of unbounded presence. You don't have to balance on the reef, you just exist with it. And these two physical elements, they perfectly mirror how our minds categorize the world around us.
Okay, so how does this actually show up in our everyday language? Well, it starts with what we call count nouns. Words like a board, for instance. These words literally force our brains to sharply focus on flat surfaces, straight edges, and spatial dimensions. When you think of a count noun, whether it's a board, a chair, or an apple, your brain instinctively draws a mental box around it. The entire object fits neatly inside your spotlight of attention. You can clearly see exactly where the object begins and where it ends. Just like riding that surfboard, your attention surrounds the object completely. And this forces your brain to operate in this highly spatial, bounded mode. You're constantly scanning for limits. You're obsessively looking for edges.
Now, in stark contrast, we have mass nouns, and these operate entirely differently. They act just like the reef. They don't require us to find a boundary to understand what the substance actually is. Think of words like water, air, or sand. When you look out at the ocean, your attention doesn't need to wrap around the entire global body of water to know, oh yeah, that's water. Instead, your spotlight of attention is actually inside the object. You're identifying the substance based on its qualities, right? Its wetness, its texture, its continuous presence, rather than its physical shape or trying to find where its edges are. You are experiencing it, not measuring it. So the absolutely crucial takeaway here is that a count noun acts just like the surfboard. It's totally surrounded by our attention, while a mass noun surrounds our attention without us ever needing to see its edges. Consider the difference between saying tables and chairs versus the word furniture. Tables and chairs basically demands that your mind visualizes distinct, countable, separate objects, all occupying specific coordinates in a room. But furniture? That's a mass noun. It refers to a generalized state or collection. Think about how slightly exhausting it would be to mentally trace and count every single chair leg and table corner in a room, versus how relaxing it is to just appreciate the furniture. One forces frantic spatial calculation, while the other allows for non-spatial recognition. To really ground this concept, let's try a super quick thought experiment from cognitive linguist Ronald W. Langacker.
I want you to picture knocking a small hole in some plaster on a wall and running your finger over the hidden material underneath. Now, you don't know if it's a long plank, a square block, or an entire wall of timber, right? You have absolutely zero spatial information about its boundaries. And yet, you instantly know it's wood. Why is that? Well, because identifying wood doesn't require spatial boundaries. It requires qualitative presence. This is a huge deal because it proves that our brains are entirely capable of profoundly understanding something without ever needing to map its edges. We already have the innate hardware for pure presence. But honestly, here's where it gets really crazy. We tend to think of nouns as the things and verbs as the actions, right? Well, that is actually a massive oversimplification. Just as nouns are split into the bounded spatial world of the surfboard and the continuous, non-spatial world of the reef, our verbs are fractured along the exact same cognitive fault line. And this divide dictates not just how we look at objects, but how we experience time and motion itself.
Just notice the rapid transitional energy of perfective verbs. Words like fall, jump, kick, break. These are events. They have a clear, definitive beginning and a clear end. They transition from one state to another, and because they track change, they are entirely grounded in tracking physical space. Now, look at imperfective verbs. Know, believe, love, appreciate. You don't start and finish loving someone in a localized spatial coordinate, do you? Loving, or knowing, is a sustained, unchanging, unbounded state of being. And this is what true mindfulness and presence feels like grammatically. It has no edges, it just is. It is the linguistic equivalent of that deep, continuous reef.
Which brings us to the core problem and exactly why sitting still feels so downright impossible sometimes. Because we have to navigate a physical, three-dimensional world just to survive, our brains have developed an overwhelming bias towards spatial categories. We constantly want to put things into boxes. We treat count nouns and perfective verbs, the surfboards of our reality, as the ultimate truth of the world. We become completely obsessed with edges, transitions, starting lines, and finish lines. To put it bluntly, we are totally addicted to the boundary.
When you view our cognition side by side like this, it is so obvious what's happening. We spend almost our entire waking lives operating on the spatial side of things. We are so busy counting objects, tracking transitional movements, and managing boundaries that we actively suppress the side governed by mass nouns, imperfective states, and pure unbounded presence. So when you try to meditate, your brain completely rebels because it is desperately looking for a surfboard to ride. It's scanning for a count noun to measure or a perfective verb to execute. It feels incredibly uncomfortable just being the reef. Our innate, overpowering spatial bias literally eats away at our capacity to just be. While we've mapped out the grammar of our cognitive divide today, I want to leave you with a really provocative thought from Weber's research for our next exploration. If our struggle to be present is fundamentally rooted in spatial perception, what role does the very physical movement of our eyes, what's called optic flow, play in trapping us there? I mean, think about it. If our grammar shapes our reality to favor boundaries, could the simple act of visual movement be constantly reinforcing that bias? Are we biologically locking ourselves out of presence every single time we look around a room? It's a fascinating question and one that challenges basically everything we know about focus, attention, and the mechanics of the human mind. So until next time, try to take a moment today to experience the world a little less like a surfboard and a little more like the reef.